everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often, those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show. This month's guest is Graham Irvin. He was recommended to me by Dan Eastman and Bram Riddlebarger. So if you like this episode, you'll like those, and if you liked those, you'll want to stick around. Graham Irvin was born in North Carolina. He currently lives in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and works at a warehouse in New Jersey. Liver Mush is his first book. You can follow him on Twitter at Graham J. Irvin, and I'll have a bunch more links in the show notes. Before we get into my conversation with Graham, I will remind you that you can support the show by going to patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. For $2 a month, you can get these shows as soon as I'm done editing them. You can also go to paypal.me/noisemakerjoe to drop a one-time donation, or you can buy my book. It's called Tired, and you can find it on Amazon. Now, without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Graham. While I was reading your book, I thought about tweeting halfway through Liver Mush, and I'm starting to think this book is only about liver mush. And while it's true every single piece is about liver mush, I mean, it's also a book that's not only about liver mush, right? Like, there's some pieces in there that, like the one about your mom, and some other stuff near the end that like really stuck out to me as like, I don't know, deeper than the sort of on the face of it silly premise about, a singular dish of food that seems to be specific to a region. So where did this book come from is a good place to start, I think.
So I think it came from a couple different places. Before writing this, I was writing a couple other pieces that did a lot of like repetitious things. There's like a poem on rejection letters, Tank Museum, that is just that phrase over and over again, Tank Museum. There's a couple other things that I was writing around the same time that was doing that as well, just finding a phrase and then writing it a lot. And that is fun to me. It also has a lot of like, I think there's a lot of inherent humor in that you can really take it anywhere. I think that you can just repeat a thing over and over and over again until it either becomes has deeper meaning, or it becomes sad, or will be funny because you create this expectation for it to mean one thing and then it means another thing. And then also just tweeting about liver mush. I think that came from being stuck in my apartment during COVID and thinking about things that I didn't necessarily have access to. And I don't really remember exactly why, just like maybe like texting with my family and being like, oh man, I really could go for some liver mush right now. And then that being one side of my life that I'm talking to my family, and then the other side of my life being just tweeting a bunch and being like, let's combine the two. And then I think just talking to Zach Smith specifically said, hey, this could be, you could write about this, you could write some poems about this. And then once I did have poems, I sent them to like a friend group, and they were very supportive in a way that made me feel like, oh, well, this could be something that has value outside of just me, writing things for myself.
Right.
Yeah.
That seems like not an uncommon thing within the back patio press sphere. Like that's kind of a similar story that Dan Eastman told about Watertown, and even though it was published through Clash, that's sort of like a similar story that Zach told about 50 Barn Poems too.
Yeah,
and I find that interesting. I don't know how common that is in the sort of poetry world as a whole. Like, it seems like, and I'm notoriously open about being very bad at poetry, but it seems to me that like the poet writing a collection of poetry does it like very quietly at home, you know, sort of like somberly, and then meekly offers it up to a couple of presses and says, please, here you go.
Yeah, I think that that way of writing it was more attractive to me because I already had like it was kind of like a green light to do it that made me maybe more excited to keep going. Because I think that there is, with any kind of project, there's a lot of times where I can like get into a snag and just be like, well, you know, like this many pages in, I feel like there's too much that I need to do to fix it. And that feels less fun than just kind of like going with something new and then, you know, restarting. And so having like a straightforward thesis at the time, I guess there's a little bit murkier thesis now of the book, but at the time just being like, these are all poems, or it's a book about Liver Mush or whatever, made it seem like a little bit easier that it could be anything. I like poetry a lot. I do like poetry. I do read poetry, but I also find myself drawn more to like books that have like some kind of theme or whatever, some kind of, maybe not a book length poem specifically, but something that is like tying them all together. And like, even if they are just about a certain time period, man, I can't remember her name. Can I Google things? Is that?
Yeah. Isn't that a test? Go ahead.
So like, fuck, I can't remember her name. Audre Lorde's like partner was this poet, and it's not showing up.
Edwin Rollins, right?
Yeah, not that. Yeah, it was a woman. I thought that.
Oh yeah.
I thought that she was married to a woman, but maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, that's interesting. Womenshistory.org says that he was a gay man, so maybe they bearded for each other?
Oh shit, I thought that Audre Lorde was a woman.
No, Audre Lorde is a woman. She married a gay man.
Okay. All right, so yeah, maybe that makes sense. Damn, all right, well, I can't find it, and I'm Adrienne Rich. That's
okay.
I don't know how they're connected, because I thought that's why they were connected. Maybe they were together at one point. She would write these poetry books, and the theme would just be like, they would always have like a subtitle of the years that they were written. And even that was interesting to me, just to say it out loud, to say 75 to 79, and then the title or whatever. So that I think, I think collections of, generally, unless I'm rambling a lot, generally a collection of stuff for me, unless it is tied together, I feel like I get fatigued, because each piece has like an emotional thrust, and then I have to then restart and like get back there. But if the thing is tied together by a theme, there's typically like an ebb and flow of energy that I think is more exciting.
I'm inclined to agree. I find that sometimes when I read poetry, I get frustrated is maybe a correct enough word to say, that like as soon as I'm finished reading a poem, I've immediately forgotten it, kind of. Like as soon as I'm on to the next one, it's just like, okay, well, and on the one hand, it's kind of like a nice mindfulness practice to just like, I'm in the poem now, and then now I'm in this poem, and now I'm in that one. But it makes it really hard to talk to poets about their poetry sometimes, because I'm like, oh, there was a really good thing there. You know, and maybe that means I need to annotate books more, but I don't enjoy doing that. I'm open about that too. So like, even though that isn't to say that I've memorized every single page of Liver Mush, but like, you can kind of, I feel like I got the emotional trajectory of it, right? Like there's, especially because there's callbacks. There's poems that are, I suppose, sequential poems, right? There's the Mark Rothko one and then the other Mark Rothko one immediately after it, and sort of being at war with yourself about the different names for Liver Mush adjacent dishes that I feel beyond just the subject matter kind of knitted everything together, right? Like it's not just a silly book about a dish, it's a collection of thoughts using this as a framework.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it's funny you talked about like reading a poem and immediately forgetting it. There's a poet that I like. I haven't read him in a while. His name is Can Lin, not Tao Lin. Can Lin.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a lot of like conceptual poetry books and things that he didn't really call poetry that would be like about poetry, but then it would be like books about craft, but then he would market it, whatever, how you market poetry as poetry. So it'd be like, this is a book about poetry, but it's poems or something. But one of the things that he talks about in one of his books is that like the perfect poem is a poem that you forget immediately, that you kind of like pass through it, and that's it. There's nothing like left with you because it just kind of like materializes through you, and then it's no more, and you've satisfied the reading process or whatever. I think that's really cool. Also, there's a guy who lives down the street from me, or I don't know where he lives. He has a bagel place down the street from me, and he also writes poetry. And I was talking to him like last week, and he was saying something along the lines of like, the difference between poetry and food is that like a piece of writing lives on like after you and like can be passed around, and that you can read it at any time, but a perfect meal is proven perfect by not existing afterwards. You know, like you read a book and then, or you read a book and then you set the book aside, and then anybody else can read it. You go back and read it, you get maybe different stuff out of it, but it's still there. But a perfect bagel is gone, you know?
Right.
And that's how you know it's perfect, because you ate it all. And I like that idea. Trying to, I don't know if that means anything to the book, but I liked thinking about those things together.
Right.
Talking CGI.
I enjoy thinking about what poetry is for these days, just because it like as a pre-prose art form, right? Like the poetics had rules so that people could remember what came next, right? Like you have to remember all the rhymes, and if it's in this meter, it means it's about this sort of thing. And as we developed prose and then like the printing press, poetry has morphed into such a different animal completely, that it's tough to know like how tightly it ties on to like its ancestry.
Yeah. I don't know. I have. I mean, I don't know. I don't know like what it's for or why. Like why poetry over something else. I think that it is. I like that it can really be about anything. You can kind of do a lot of different stuff in a poem in a very short amount of space, and with enough confidence or with enough skill or whatever, it can kind of do whatever it wants in a way that maybe you have to. There's a lot more work or finesse involved in longer pieces. Or a novel can do a lot of different stuff, or a short story can do a lot of different stuff. They also can do anything, sure. But I guess you'd have to like have a character that then brings you to some conclusion, or you might be more constrained with prose. You know, there has to be somebody narrating it and bringing you somewhere, whereas like a poem could be a grocery list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like the freedom. I like how like anarchist it has become, you know, especially within the sphere of your back patio presses and your House of Lads, and some of the Sam Pink stuff, how it like I don't know, like the minimalism of it, like it feels very internet informed. I mean, to the point where people do just publish their tweets as poetry.
Yes.
But it's interesting to see where it's going, because the poetry that I tend to read, whenever I do go out and pick up poetry, tends to be a little bit older, like the sort of post-beat stuff, which is still like very narrative, right? Like a lot of it is, there's a lot of the I in the poetry and things like that. So I think probably what my biggest problem is that I've like a giant missing link of poetry history context, right? Like I know about like, you know, Beowulf, and I know about stuff from the 60s, very little, and then I know stuff that was written like this year. And there's many stages, I think, that I'm missing, as well as like a whole global context as well too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing that ties it to, you know, Beowulf or the Odyssey and like Homer and stuff like that is that it is still maybe prioritizing voice. You know, the Odyssey was like spoken in parts, mm-hmm. and easier to remember, but it was usually performed out loud. And I think that like whether or not it's poetry that's written to sound like talking, which I think a lot of the internet poetry is to sound like either the way that you talk, like conversationally, or maybe mirroring the way that you talk on the internet. Or there's also like the opposite of that, where it's like focusing on like the weirdness of language, like language poetry is a lot of stuff that people don't talk like that, but it's making you kind of experience these weird things by making, like when you read it, your brain is trying to piece it together through like how this sounds out loud. So it's like spoken still, and then like, you know, because it's focusing on like the way that you say the words out loud, that is a big part of it. Maybe that's why.
It could be. Your Neutral Spaces bio says that you got an MFA in 2018. What's that?
I said I did.
Good. What was your MFA experience like as a person without one? I find it, I like to live vicariously through people who did end up going and getting one.
Yeah. I don't know. It was, I felt very special getting in. I don't think anyone in my family has ever gotten a grad degree. A lot of people in my family haven't gotten even like went to any kind of college. Like neither of my parents went to like community college. Like my mom got a degree at a community college. My stepdad didn't go anywhere past high school. A lot of people in my family didn't go anywhere past high school. And so, not to say didn't go anywhere, but didn't get degrees.
Right.
So it was a big deal in that regard. And it definitely felt like a world that was very strange to be in. And for a while in it, I felt very excited because you have this kind of passion, and you feel like you mostly express that personal, like privately in your own writing time, where you read or something. If you have friends, unless you have a writing group where all your friends are writers or whatever, you typically don't talk about it unless you find it on the internet or something like that. But I think a lot of people who are writers are the writer in the friend group, and then feel kind of lonely because of that. And when I first got into the grad program, I felt like everybody's a writer, and I can like relate to everybody about writing, and everything I'm talking about, everybody is also that. But then I also like, in talking to those people, it started to feel like it was even harder to relate to them because of the kind of writing they did, or the kind of writing that they wanted to do, or what they read or whatever. So then that became even like this bigger gulf between who I thought were people I related to after spending a little bit of time in it. So it was like maybe a little bit disheartening, I would say. I think that like I went for poetry, and I think that maybe a positive about poetry in grad school is that they don't really make you think you're going to get money or become famous or anything like that. There's not really, you don't get book deals for poetry books, even if you're getting you're winning some kind of award and getting published on the Grey Wolf. That would be the goal for a lot of people in grad school, but even then you're not making a bunch of money. And so I think that in itself is kind of nice, was at least made me able to say I can really do whatever I want to, and I don't have to really adhere to these rules. I think that like maybe, and this might just be my own problem, if you go for fiction or nonfiction, there's a path for you that really encourages you to write a certain way. Because you can, and like you could make money if you wrote like the perfect memoir or the best selling novel or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think overall I don't regret going, but it is not something that I think is necessary or something that if somebody asked me should they go, I would be like, you don't need it. Don't waste the time. Don't waste the money. It's I learned a lot about poetry, but I also think that I could do that with the right amount of like energy. I could read whatever. The thing is that like most of the stuff that I really feel like drawn to that I read during that time was stuff that I like found on my own. So maybe I wouldn't have found it if I wasn't reading something shitty that my professor said you should read. But, maybe I would have found those things anyway if I was just like, I want to read about poetry from 82, or I want to read a novel by a poet that, was weird, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's all accessible, I think.
Right. Yeah. It's not, here are the books that only people in MFA programs can read. Like, we've kept these away from the population. There's no, unfortunately, I think there's no occult knowledge being hidden away. Probably in any degree program. I certainly would trust an engineer who went to college more than one who just watched an awful lot of YouTube. But
and I think too that like there's a lot of people who are much better read than I am, who did not, go to school for writing. Like, Troy James Weaver is probably like one of the guys who's like read more than anyone that I've ever met. I'll talk to him and he will like know not only like this book, but every book that person read, and then like persons that person wrote with it, like during their time, and like, fiction and poetry and stuff like that. And that he just isn't like a guy who's interested in books and has always been interested in books. And so he knows about them, and he knows about them because he read them. And I don't think that you can't teach that. I think what people talk about with MFAs is that you gain connections, but I did a really great job of like burning bridges by not liking anybody when I was in my program and being kind of like a jerk at various times because I thought people were, I don't know, annoying or I didn't like their stuff or it'd be like, this sucks or this is insincere or something like that. So I don't know. I mean, I had my girlfriend, I met her in grad school, and my friend Eli, I saw him. He's a really good writer, one of my best friends, and I met him there. And I think those are like very important relationships, but it's not like we talk about that stuff too much.
Right. I like that perspective. I think the thing that I appreciate most about talking to other writers and probably would appreciate the most about an MFA program is just being able to sit down and work through something verbally that I had a hard time with, right? Like, I mean, there are some books that I've read that kind of wish I had someone to talk to about it while I was reading it, or at least immediately after. Like if I had somebody who knew about Beckett while I was trying to stumble my way through some of his novels, like I feel like I probably would have benefited from them more. And so to have, I don't even know, a dozen people plus someone who's been teaching the same material for however many years all be working on the same thing at the same time, I feel like that would be useful. But that's like just from a reader standpoint. Like I don't necessarily know if I'd be a better writer now if I understood Beckett in 2018 when I read Beckett in 2018. Like I have no idea.
Another thing about that is that in any like workshop, you only maybe care about like two people's opinions, and then the rest you just kind of have to like listen to. And like, I mean, I think that's the way. I mean, maybe especially in an MFA when like it feels like if you don't say something, you're not like participating enough, or you don't get it. So you read you read a piece, and then everybody has to say something to like not only say that they get it, but to say that they're participating by getting it, and then also like giving their opinion about it, which might not help you. Like you only, like you, I'm sure have people who you care about, who you could send them something, who know your voice and would say, this works for you, and I see what you're doing, and I get that. And like, it's difficult to find that anywhere, but I think that like when you also tack in like this weird setting where everybody's like trying to prove themselves, you get somebody saying like, okay, well, Joe, what if tired was actually energized? What if we changed it to energized? We talk a lot about tiredness, but maybe I just think that like, maybe we could have a little bit more like, maybe not the entire thing is tired. Maybe just a chapter of it's energized. Like, all right, let me pretend to write that down.
Yeah. Those are the people who end up as like movie producers, right? Where it's like, okay, yeah. No, Star Wars, I got it. But what if we have Furbies in the movie and we just call them porgs? Like, what if, I feel like that would be a good idea. Yeah.
What toy can we put into your novel that then, when it becomes a movie, we can market?
Yeah.
I think there's children who want in on this story too. We're leaving them out off the table if we don't put in some kind of toy.
Oh man. I guess for tired it would just be stone crucifixes, wouldn't it? It would just be just steal a whole bunch of crucifixes out of some like Christian store in a strip mall, and then sell them, drop ship them.
Yeah, that's perfect.
To that point, I'm quite glad that you have a vegan recipe for liver mush in the back of the book, because I very much intend to make it. One of the things I think that you were quite successful at in this book is making me want to eat liver mush. And my wife likes to know what I'm reading and what it's about and stuff. So I explained it to her, and she does not want to eat liver mush. I don't think even not being in her third trimester would make her want to eat liver mush. So the vegan recipe is very useful, and I intend to try it. I'm interested to. Well, I guess you kind of say that, like, in the epilogue, that, like, you want to make sure that everybody has access to liver mush. So here's a recipe. But I just found it to be quite a good touch.
Yeah. I think, I think that was the main idea. And then also that, like, there's a handful of things that I could point to and say that it's like this or it's like that. But that those things are still maybe not exactly right, like, or not, you're never going to, unless you go to that specific area, you probably aren't going to find it. And so I guess it kind of playful. I also wanted to make sure that I could do it like I say in the recipe. Like I've never really written a recipe. I like cooking. I like making food and stuff like that, but I don't really ever like communicate that to somebody when I'm talking about food. Usually it's about, like, if I'm telling you about like a thing I ate that I really liked, I'm talking about like the flavor profile. And then maybe if it's something weird, I would relate it to something else. Like it's maybe a little bit more understandable. So it was a personal challenge to like try to write the recipe. And then, but yeah, I like that idea. Like, I think that, like, just thinking that it's a turnoff because a lot of people not only don't want to eat something that has the word liver in it, but also don't eat meat in general. Even if they were open to the idea, it would be like, well, this isn't for me. There's maybe some kind of inherent violence in writing about, meat that is, processed meat or something, or something that is like so inherently tied to meat industry or something. So like trying to like maybe tack on a an apology at the end that says, hey, look, it's not that. You can also enjoy this even if you don't take the souls of other living.
Right. Yeah, I'll eat pork, but of the meats, I probably have the hardest time eating pork. Because in sociology class, we had to watch that PETA video about factory farms, and listening to a pig die makes you not want to eat pig.
Yeah.
I also read it as a sort of playful lampooning of the way that recipes are written, especially on the internet, where you're like scrolling past a 10,000 word essay about something, Yeah. And I understand the purpose of something like that in a cookbook or in a cooking blog, right? To like sort of tie an emotion to a dish that people might not necessarily have an emotional connection to, especially with comfort food, that like you would want to set the stage for the eating of this food. And I don't know if that was your intention, but it made me think about it a lot, especially just like interrupting yourself, which is another tactic that I see a decent amount these days that I really enjoy.
Yeah. I guess that when I was writing it, I wasn't necessarily thinking about that, but then it did just become that. So like when I do think about it, it's like it does kind of read like those internet recipe essays where it is front loaded with a bunch of stuff about like, and it's kind of almost the exact same thing of just being like, and now when I first ate this, it was from my grandma made it, and she would always tell me this story, and so it is kind of doing the exact same thing. But I don't know. I guess I was trying to make it so it was like more fun or whatever. Mm-hmm. Funner than that, as I started writing it. I really like the idea of, and I kind of talked about it like in the recipe, I think, where if you eat a bag of chips, while waiting for the recipe to to set? Does the bag of chips become part of the recipe? And like, I like the idea of thinking about just a straightforward recipe that would include like, you're going to need a subscription to this podcast, and you're going to need a 2 bags of chips and dip, but the recipe is not about that. It's so that you eat the bag of chips while you're making it, and watch and listen to the podcast while you're doing it, and all that kind of stuff, so that it becomes like an interactive experience. And like, I don't know, like the idea of like controlling what you do through the recipe is very funny to me. So that like the experience is not just the end result, but the process too.
Right. No, I like that. That makes me think about like pre-modern medicine that's sort of like magical in nature, where they're like, make sure you say these words over the wound while you're putting the herbs on it or whatever, because you don't know, is it because I'm saying the words? Like, it worked when I said the words last time, so I guess I'd just better tell everybody to say the words over it. I like that idea of making a recipe an entire ritual process of like, yeah, like you better have a Bud Light with you while you're grilling or whatever. I also found it funny that it's like halfway through the recipe that you're like, oh yeah, you're gonna have to put this in the fridge for 6 hours, just so you know. I hope you're not hungry right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, yeah, just forget it. I forgot that part of it while writing it. And didn't include prep time in the beginning. Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah. I also thought that was fun to say that you could go back and read the book 6 times if you wanted to, or something like that. I've never been really interested in recipes like that. I think that with the internet, when I do look up a recipe, it's because I want an idea about like what goes in it. Like, I think that unless it's crazy, I'm adept enough to know that if you tell me this has these spices or these like vegetables or whatever, I can kind of gauge how much to do, you know. It's more about like what the flavor is that I'm looking for. So like what I will do is look up like 3 or 4 recipes and then pick out the things that sound like what's closest to what I have and what I want to try. I hate how much there is like front matter to a lot of recipes, but I am currently reading Kitchen Confidential, the Anthony Bourdain book. And he talks about he'll like talk about chefs that he like worked with or knew, and will like say this chef wrote this crazy book and it's really good, and like that means a cookbook, and but he doesn't talk about them in terms of like how good the recipes are. He talks about what they are about, because they're typically like an underlying narrative to why a chef writes a cookbook. And so that makes more sense to me, that a person who is interested in food would maybe want this story behind it and would be more interested in that. Where like, I'm going to read through this and not use it as a reference book. I'm going to use it as like a way to learn more about this chef and this type of cuisine and this story behind the cuisine or whatever. And it made me want to like look into like books like that, because I always think of them through the context of, well, why would I need a cookbook? I have the internet.
Right.
And if I look on the internet, I'm not reading any of that stuff, so I don't care about that stuff.
Yeah, I've seen every season of Top Chef because my wife likes it. And I suppose 16 years into it, I like it now too. But that's one of the big reoccurring criticisms that the judges use with the chefs is like, we want to eat your food and know who you are. Show us who you are is something that they say all the time. And as a person who I can follow a recipe and I can tell when food's burning. I can kind of, I know how much paprika versus chili powder to put in a dish or something like that. But I have a hard time imagining, getting to know somebody by eating their food. So it's nice to know that there's like, a higher level to cooking, to being a chef, that there is something like very intimate about it. it's nice to know that it's there even if I can't access it.
Yeah. I think that like I was talking to Caitlin recently about maybe personal skill of mine with talking about food. When I first started dating her almost 5 years ago, she was vegetarian and didn't eat. She like, maybe ate chicken sometimes, but it was relatively picky with what she ate, even if it was vegetarian. Like the vegetarian thing was maybe more of a picky thing than it was like an ethical thing, but it was kind of tied together. And we started dating, and I would talk about food that I liked. That's what I do, and like through that, I like got her to try like burgers and like steak and eventually liver mush and all this other stuff. And there's part of that that maybe is a little bad. Like maybe there's like this one less vegetarian in the world that maybe isn't good. But then there's also part of that where like when we were talking about it, she was like, the reason that I trusted you more than I've trusted like anybody else who obviously has said the exact same thing or close to the same thing. If you meet somebody who's vegetarian, like there's always the people who say, oh, you don't like burgers? Oh, you don't like a big juicy hunk of steak? Like they're not good at explaining why it's good or like talking about why that specifically is good. And like I likes to talk about the reason why a burger is good and like why the meat with the cheese and like the other stuff on top of it, why the bun is great, why like a piece of ribeye is very, very good, and like what it tastes like that you're maybe familiar with. And I think that's how I talk about food, but it made me feel like a certain amount of pride in my ability to tell stories is, rather than maybe my pride to convince somebody to go against their ethics. It made me feel good for her to frame it that way. I don't know. That's how I think about food.
Yeah, there was a running series of articles that Sarah Gerard did for Hazlitt back in the day. I don't remember what years, but it was about her dealing with anorexia, and so it was a lot of food writing, kind of as a way of enjoying food. And also just like good nonfiction, creative nonfiction writing and stuff. And her book Binary Star is about anorexia and veganarchism that introduced some interesting ideas to my brain. But yeah, I food writing I think is just very interesting. I enjoy, I don't know, I guess because the sort of general way that you teach people to write is to show, don't tell. And taste kind of often gets left out because it's sort of a passive sense that like you're not actively always tasting things, right? Like asking an anxious person what their teeth taste like is always a surefire way of getting a rise out of them.
Yeah.
So it's cool when we focus on that because you kind of get like a synesthesia sort of thing going on, or at least it's just a lot of senses kind of combined together. It also occurs to me that this book is just one of those it could be jokingly or cynically seen as one of those internet articles where it's 100 pages of preamble before a recipe.
Yeah. I do like that idea.
I think that's funny that accidentally came into my brain while we were talking.
Finally, you're here.
Something I am always curious about with people too is how they edit, especially the epilogue, because of like the interrupting yourself. Like on the second, third, fourth, fifth read through, I'm interested like how that gets crafted into like a very intentional sort of thing, if at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I tried to structure it. I tried to structure the book based on a loose narrative of what was happening while I was writing this stuff. So not having a job to having a job, kind of coming, finding the stories about like home and things in that, that like I'm talking about this thing to myself, then having new people in my life because I have this job, I'm trying to like, well, this is all I've been talking about. I guess I have to relate to them in this way. And then, so that kind of fell into place that way. Then the editing process of that with like interrupting or whatever, like, I guess that would come from came through from like maybe rereads and like seeing things where I could like tie in other jokes, or tie in like callbacks to other things or places where maybe a poem didn't ended on like an image or ended itself in a way that would have been a fine ending, but it could do more or less the same thing and then also call something back. So like one of the poems, let's see, I think it's the one that's about at the warehouse in New Jersey, where it's about like putting like what the process of my job was of like putting things into boxes and then sending them off to North Carolina, and then the ending being like, I hope this t-shirt cures your depression. Like, I think the original ending of that was like, I hope whatever you bought makes you happy, which is the same. I mean, that would have been okay, but I think that it is more or less the same thought as the other one, and like, why not put that in there? Like, why not call back these things? Or a lot of it too was like, Zach would edited it and would go through and say like, there's no liver mush in this. There's not enough liver mush. Where can we like kind of move out from this specific moment to like the bigger moment and things like that. So like the bigger moment being both the book, Liver Mush, and then also the point of the book being like, I'm trying to convince you this is something valuable of your time. And so like the interrupting then becomes like, are you tired of liver mush yet? Let me tell you why you shouldn't be. Or let me at least quell your fears that you might think I don't know that this is getting annoying, but I'm also somewhat annoyed by it too, or things like that,
Right. Do you find a worry I often have about my own writing is that I feel like it's too influenced by whatever I'm reading at the time. So I always feel like I have to write something really fast before I like finish whatever book I'm done or I'm reading at the time. And therefore like editing becomes kind of a problem for me. Do you find that you have the same sort of thing where like your writing is colored by whatever you're writing? So like, I don't know, for you can see in a first draft where you finished one book and started another or anything like that?
Maybe to a certain degree. I think that with this, I relate a lot of it to like Richard Brodigan and Scott McClanahan and stuff like that. I think that, but I also, I feel like maybe there's like a part of me that either wants to like lean into it or like read more of those things. Like if I am reading something while writing and then it feels to like click in and maybe like influence my writing, then I want to like read more of that stuff by that person and see why, maybe like in that way I have more control over the influence. Because if I am just reading a book while I'm writing and then it feels like I pull something out or I use a phrase that feels maybe like not as much mine, then I would say like I'd be like, oh, that's not great, that's not mine, I can't do that. But then if I feel that, well, I was drawn enough to it to do that, maybe I could get more from them, and then have like more of a conscious reason as to why I was drawn to it, or I could put it in there in a way that's like that it's a guide rather than a like intrusive thought.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's pretty wise. But I should do that. I'm gonna take that advice, because I don't know why I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, it makes sense to examine what it is being like expressed out of you by the experience of reading this other work.
Yeah, I don't know if it works for everything. I mean, I think that, I mean, it might, I don't know. I think that if you took that to its logical conclusion, that means that maybe a lot of writing would just be like also a study of ex author or whatever,
right?
And that might not be the most interesting thing, but I don't know. I enjoy doing that. The thing I'm writing now, I was like watching these short films by Jennifer Reeder, and I liked them a lot. So I wrote about them into the thing, and so that has been fun, like rewatching her stuff and trying to like figure out why specifically I liked it, and if that means anything, or if it is just a part of the thing that I'm writing about. Like if it is just am I just interested in it, and then it just becomes like part of the story, or is it also just something that could, I could do something.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good practice. Maybe just in general. I think maybe it might be nice to prescribe more of that, just in the general, fast pace of the media culture as it is anyway, to encourage yourself to kind of sit with something more and more. Like, I have a bedroom filled of unread books, so much so that it feels like kind of wrong to reread something, because it's like I have wasted money in the other room waiting to be utilized, or I don't know, I'm wasting my time reading a book that I've already read. I don't know. So I like that you're doing that. As I don't know, I guess it gives me permission to do something like that too, right? That like you can sit down and really kind of get at why something is clicking with you. I mean, I have like, I posted on Twitter a long time ago, like a screenshot of my notes app of like movies and TV shows that have that vibe, and I like I can list them off, but I can't exactly explain what it is. And so I don't know, I guess the most logical thing to do would be to go back and watch them again, maybe all close together, and try to really suss out what that is.
Yeah, I think also like I like writing, obviously, and I like reading, and I like engaging with art or whatever. But I think it also, like, the older I get, the more it's the same, like the initial spark that I felt when I read like the book that like turned me on or whatever. I get that less and less, and I don't mean that in like a negative way. I think it just is like the more you read, the more you are like aware of what's going on, and so like it takes a little bit more work to get there. So when something does feel like, to me, like, oh, I like that a lot, that's cool, or that's new, or like, oh, I haven't like had a thing that like really did that for me in a long time, I like, like why not like check it out more and see what else that person has that would make me feel that again, or even in a cynical way, be able to categorize it in my brain so that I can say now in the future when I read something, I say they're doing this, that person is like that because I read that person's books. But yeah, I think it's like, yeah, just going toward the brightest light. Not it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot. I feel like I've talked about it on this show before, but just there is an anxiety that I'm not like well read enough. So I do this thing where I kind of like cycle through. Like I'll read a classic and then I'll read something like nonfiction, and then I'll try to read like 4 things that were published this year by our ecosystem of people, because I also feel like maybe this is just a like a social anxiety thing. Like I feel like everybody, instead of feeling like everybody's going to a party I'm not invited to, I feel like everybody's reading the one indie book that I haven't read yet. So I don't know, maybe it's just me like
I think
being too hard on myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's also like a conversation just like halt anytime you haven't read anything, which really sucks. Like I think that like just in general, as a person who talks about books, if somebody brings up a book you haven't read and you're just like, I don't know about that one. And I think that is a big bummer, unless that person can maybe like engage you and like bring you in and maybe tell you something about the book. But I do feel the way that you're talking about, where I also feel like I haven't read enough, or that there is more that I could be doing. And I think that I also do what you're doing too, where I read a lot of different things, and I try to like my to read books are not all like from one person. They're all over the place, and they're all from different time periods, and they're all going to check off certain boxes that I feel are bare in my repertoire or whatever. But I also think that like from my own experience and from talking to people that like, yeah, reading a lot, like, or maybe even the saying, it's like it's better to read deep than to read wide. You might only have read, I don't know, one person, but you've read everything that person did. You maybe have like a better understanding of writing than if you read a bunch of stuff, but only read like one book by everybody. And so, or like, I don't know, like whoever, I think that the individual might learn more from reading somebody's entire body of work than from reading everything that came out in like 1 year.
Yeah, I mean, certainly people are writing PhD dissertations on like the work of one person and not necessarily, the entirety of every book that was published in the 80s or something like that. The other thing I wanted to make sure that I got to was to ask you about your work with X-ray. I find the particular job of being a curator in this space to be fascinating as well.
Yeah. So when I started, I mean, I'm mostly just an editor. I read submissions. They're not sent directly to me. They're just kind of like submissions that are assigned to various readers. It's a pretty good bit of readers on X-Ray. When I first started, there was like a big call for like people to send stuff directly to me. But I think I read about like 60 or so pieces, and selected maybe 10. But I think I don't know. It is sometimes difficult or annoying work. I think that like I enjoy finding like a piece by somebody who I've never heard of that like really seems good, and that like I feel like by saying this is great, this is something we should publish, that's a rare feeling, because like a lot of people have a voice already or have an avenue for publishing, so it's rare to find somebody who has this like voice and style that maybe hasn't been published yet, or not published enough, or not on X-Ray. So that's exciting, and I enjoy that. That is where I feel most amount of maybe like pride and whatever. uh, like I'm doing my duty whenever that happens. And then like, yeah, I also like edit a lot of those things. So a lot of the stuff, if I do feel very strongly about it, it typically comes to me for me to like edit it or work with the author for a little bit to clean it up. And that is also typically fun. I think that it's fun to like find a place where I think, yeah, in fiction a lot, it's interesting where you can see what somebody is going for, but it's not exactly there, or like this moment in the story is maybe not exactly there. It doesn't necessarily take away from the overall thing, but with like just little tweaks, you can get it there. And that's like, I don't know, that's very fun. That just feels like solving some kind of problem where you can just see like it's a little blurry, and then you can tinker with it a little bit and then be able to clearly see what's going on. I like that. This is called Bambi Wants to Eat What We're Eating. Story about my cat. She stands on her back paws and uses her front paw to pull a piece of liver mush off our plate onto the floor. She just stares at it. She licks it and shakes her head. She shakes her head like she does when something hurts her nose. Like liver mush is carbonation or a piece of lime or a pepper seed. She carries the piece of liver mush in her teeth for 2 seconds, then drops it. She sits and stares harder at the chewed liver mush on the carpet. The liver mush is broken now. The part that hurt her nose is out in the open air. Liver mush smells like the kitchen and Kay and me in her mouth, and it hurts her nose. She thinks, this is food if I make it food. All I have to do is be determined and it will be food. All I have to do is chew through the hurt and it will be food. But when something is on their plates, it's food. When something hurts their noses, they keep eating because they're the biggest animals I've ever seen. I want what's on their plates because I want to be big like them. I want to be the biggest animal. But Bambi doesn't like the liver mush. She doesn't like it enough to make it food. She stares at the piece she pulled onto the carpet until it no longer smells like anything. Until the heat leaves and it becomes a type of lint. Bambi stands on her back paws again and uses her front paw again to pull more of the same liver mush onto the carpet, next to the old piece of now cold liver mush. The same thought runs through her head. How the hell do I eat this shit? I want her to like it as much as she wants to like it. I want her to be the biggest animal I've ever seen. I want her to fill the tiny apartment and crush us with her soft white belly. I want her to protect us when we're sick and feeble. I want her to bring home the mush and provide the mush and feed us the mush. But she doesn't like it. Bambi, please give it a chance. Bambi, join our team. We could rule the world. Bambi, what don't you like? Bambi, how can I change your mind? Bambi, have I failed you or have you failed me? Bambi.